You're listening to Talking Threat Intelligence, a podcast dedicated to uncovering the new challenges of today's threat landscape. Each episode, we connect with some of the world's leading practitioners to share stories from the front lines of corporate security. And now, on to the show.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Talking Threat Intelligence. I'm your host, Robert Value. And joining me today, back on the show for a third time, is one of my favorite guests, Alan Saquella, Professor of Business Security and Intelligence at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University in Arizona, and a consultant for Verensics. Alan, thanks for joining me today.
Robert, thank you for having me on. It's great to be back.
Now, Alan, you have a fascinating article coming out in an upcoming issue of Security Magazine. It's titled, Taking Security from a Cost Center to Cost Neutral and Beyond. And I thought that was really, really interesting. Can you tell listeners a bit more about that?
Absolutely. You know, Robert, security, if you ask a couple of people, you're going to get a different definition. So security to some people is the protection of people, product, information. It could be on the physical security side, or it could be on the InfoSec side. But it generally fits in this boundary of protection, if you will. And so if you think about protection and security, it's a cost center. Traditionally, what you do is you protect information, property, and people and information. And so over the course of my career, I realized that if I really was going to expand the importance of security, and as I worked my way up in ranks in the corporate security world, I realized that we had to do more. Security has been striving to become more than what it is. And you'll see that some organizations have made that. They made that switch successfully, going from security to asset protection, asset preservation, or enterprise risk management, which is a lot more than just protection arena. So that's what started this. And so when I look back, it was about 10 years ago, I did a presentation at ASIS, American Society for Industrial Security, on this very topic. And I did it based on the company results of where I worked. And then since then, it was fine-tuned to the point where I decided to relaunch this article with more updated information. So I think it's important for all security practitioners, especially at the C-suite, chief security officer level, to think about how can they take their security department from a cost center to cost neutral and beyond, because it is possible.
What exactly do you mean by cost neutral then, in that sense?
Well, cost neutral. So the article in this particular example, I picked one company. And of course, I talked to a lot of security practitioners out there where we took their budget of $100 million a year. So that was people, contracts, technology. That was the whole arena. So when I talk corporate security, I'm not talking the InfoSec side. I'm talking security operations, physical security, and investigations. So cost neutral would be if my budget is $10 million a year. And I'm able to actually recover, prevent losses in the amount of $10 million. That makes it cost neutral. If I go beyond that, it could actually be turned into a profit center. There are some organizations and some industries that do a very good job of this. And some industries don't even want to broach it, and partly because they're government contractors and they're actually stuck in this particular confine of we cannot go outside of this realm. And I understand that. So this may not be appropriate for all organizations, but for those who are not restricted, they should certainly look to move their security from a cost center to at least cost neutral or as close as possible. And so in the article, I give a really good examples of where this particular company and this chief security officer was able to look for those opportunities, which I'll explain further on.
No, I just think that's so interesting, because once you have that cost center label, it's always the thing that can be cut during hard times. You know, it's seen as the liability when you're talking to C-suite executives and stuff like that. But once you can kind of make that mental transition, it's like, oh, now we're interested in investing and bringing this stuff up, which I want to talk about a little bit later. Tell me about the time where you kind of made this transition yourself, because I'm assuming from your background in law enforcement, you didn't start with this mentality. You had to develop that over time. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, I can tell you how it first started. It first started when I was looking for some additional capital for a camera system. I wanted to upgrade the camera system. And so I decided to meet with the chief financial officer and say, I need $100,000 to do this. And he just kind of laughed at me and said, okay, that's great. I know you're the second guy to ask for additional upgrades. What are you going to give me in return? I go, what do you mean? What's the return on investment? And, I said, we're going to protect our people and we're going to have less losses. Well, that's great. How much? So I walked away from that meeting. Of course, I didn't get the capital. And I went to an MBA student who said, Saquella, you can't go ask for money without understanding financial acumen, business acumen, return on investment, SWOT analysis, business case. These are all foreign terms to me. So that was the revelation. And so what I did is I paired up with this particular MBA student, and he helped me understand the language. I basically got a working man's MBA, if you will. In this world, if you're at the top, if you're a director or above, you need to understand finance, operations, the business. You need to have a working man's MBA, if not a real MBA.
You just walked in, they didn't take it seriously at all until you can translate the point that you're trying to make into the ROI, into the spreadsheet that the CFO can understand. They're not interested in giving you any kind of budget.
That's absolutely right. And so that was the start of it. And that was early on in the transition to the corporate world. And I was only at a regional level. And as I progressed and understood and, of course, embraced this idea of getting that financial and operations and business understanding, when it came to play was right around the time of the Great Recession we had in 2008. We started having budget cuts, like you mentioned. When you're in a recession, cost centers get hit. Security got hit, risk got hit, safety, HR, all the departments that don't generate revenue started getting hit. I said, wait a second, we still have to protect. And so that's when this whole idea went from just an idea and a concept to reality. And so that's when I started looking, how am I going to be able to run my department with this limited budget? I have to figure out how to add additional value. By this time, I was with the company 3 years. I was running the operation for the whole West region, and I started looking outside of the security arena.
So what happened once you started to adopt that mentality? Like when you started to go into the boardrooms, how did that conversation change when you were talking to executives?
Well, certainly it was very effective. So it wasn't just about asking for capital. So it's one thing to ask for capital, and let's say you have an allocation of budget every year for the security budget, but that was never enough because when you want to increase your budget, you're going to have to do more. So what I started to do is I started to look outside of the traditional security responsible areas, just like in the article and the examples, I did pretty much the same thing as this particular individual did. What we did is, number one, you have to look in your own backyard. And what I realized right away was we were paying too much for security guard services, integration, break fix of our security systems. So in the article, I explained you need to go out to RFP, request for proposals, find out what the market value is of the services you're getting. What I found is I was getting ripped off and I was paying way too much. My predecessor had relationships with those vendors. And of course, unfortunately, they were taking advantage of it. And in the case study and also in the article, you'll see that particular case, he too was paying too much. So you go out to RFP, you immediately change all the vendors, change the language in the contract. And what you saw in that particular case, or what I saw, was a significant reduction in cost where I was able to bring back over $1 million in savings immediately just by changing vendors. When you start that in your backyard, it gives you some credibility when you then go back to the CFO and ask for some additional capital. But I didn't even do that. What I then did, and also in the article, what we then did is, or my peer did, is we went through and started looking outside in other departments. Where are there areas of savings? So I'll give you a real big example. In the telecommunications industry, and this is in the article as well, when you're expanding your growth and you're building out to new businesses as well as residents, you're burying fiber optic lines in the ground. That's the best way to do it instead of going aerial on telephone or power poles. And by doing so, you have to excavate and you dig, you put your fiber in, and then you hope nobody else will be digging and cutting. In the case where you're in a high growth area, there'll be other excavators out there. There'll be everybody from landscapers to power company to building folks who are excavating, and they'll cut your fiber line. So fiber is very costly to repair. Fiber is like your hair. If you got 320 count fiber line, you got 320 hairs running through that conduit, which is basically glass. And when it's cut, it has to be fused together. When it's fused together, it creates like a scar tissue, if you will. And telecommunications information is transported through light. When it hits that scar, if you will, it slows, it degrades the transmission of information, which provides less service. So you ultimately have to make the repair, then do a span replacement. So you might have one particular area could be $100,000 repair. That's pretty costly. Who pays for that? And our construction department would generally just go out there, make the repair, and go about business. They were not actually pursuing recovery. And when they did, they only got pennies on the dollar. There's generally one or two people at fault when that damage occurs. Either the excavator was not digging properly in the blue stake markings, paint markings on the ground, or the locating company that put the paint on the ground mislocated the fiber line. In either event, somebody should be responsible for the cost of that. What we did, and also in the article, we explained that it shouldn't be the construction folks. There was a plan that was put together. There was a SWOT analysis. And then I proposed that our department, just like in the article, should take over that responsibility for investigating fiber optic line damages. And immediately started recovering hundreds of thousands of dollars a year because we're trained investigators, we know how to do it, and we're not going to be swayed by relationships with contractors or locating companies. So that's outside of traditional security. But construction was generally responsible for those repairs and then also pursuing recovery dollars for the damages, which they don't want to do. That's not what they're in business for. They're in business to make the repairs and then run new fiber lines. So that's just one example where that translated in the article to close to a $6 million a year recovery by security taking on those investigations and then pursuing recovery versus allowing the department that does the work within the organization. Again, they just want to build it, make repairs, and move on. They don't want to become collectors or investigators. And so in the article, we talk about looking for those opportunities, and you really have to be creative and you have to understand the business in which you operate beyond just your security realm. What is that organization in business for? And how can you look? And you need to be open-minded as you're looking.
I love what you're explaining through that story. And it sounds like your mentality had to shift from just the security person to almost this, I think the word is entrepreneur, like someone who has that entrepreneurial mentality within their department, because you're not just saying, okay, I'm protecting the people or protecting property. I'm also looking for the opportunities within the business and thinking about this with, you have the bottom line, you have this investment in your organization. I got to invest that capital in the same way the marketing department has to think about it, or any other kind of department within the thing. And I just love that transition through that example of your mentality. That's so important. And I've had conversations like this with other guests about that mental shift that you need to be successful in the corporate world versus, say, law enforcement. Just had a great chat the other day, Carlos Francisco, about the customer service mentality that you need to bring to the corporate space. And then you're talking about the same thing here with the entrepreneurial business shift to be successful.
Yeah, absolutely, Robert. And you have to. So that's why I mentioned early on, security becomes secondary because you're great at security. That's your forte. That's going to run pretty much once you get it operational. As you move towards hiring the best possible people, and I always emphasize, soar with your strengths and minimize your weaknesses and the way you minimize your weaknesses is hire the experts around you that understand finance, that understand the operations. In both the article and where I came from, I hired people that had experience in fiber optics, damage prevention investigations, and brought them into my department as I had turnover and opportunities because I knew I was going to pursue other opportunities, just like this individual in the article that was described. And so that was the largest recovery. We went for the low-hanging fruit first. That was the huge big bang. So when I went into the CFO and said, listen, here's what we're doing. We're now recovering, let's say, $6 million a year. This money's going back to that construction department. That makes them feel really good. And you're building relationships like never before, that all of a sudden the construction vice president sees you as a business partner. They really see you as a hero. You're no longer just that guy that wears the security badge walking around protecting assets. They look at you very differently. In the article, we go into other departments as well. So that was the biggest. And the next low-hanging fruit in the article, we talked about looking at some of the claims that come in from an insurance perspective. So, for example, in my company where I retired from, according to insurance professionals as well as the National Insurance Agency, I can't think of the name of the organization, but it's in the article, they quoted that at least 10% of insurance claims are fraudulent. Of course, I'm looking at what we're reporting, and we don't have any. So we must be missing some. We started investigating that area, and also in the article, that same individual did the same thing. And we found that there was a certain number of claims, but there was about 1,000 claims coming in a year. So if that 10% is accurate, you've got a potential for 100 per year, they're fraudulent. So through, again, using your resources, your investigators are already trained, start looking into those claims of slip and falls in your business, any other type of property damage claim coming from an external source that's reporting it, and then start denying these claims. And you can see the recoveries. We're able to recover hundreds of thousands of dollars in that particular case. And the other thing about the insurance industry and the way they actually charge insurance, it's based on severity of the incident and frequency of the number of claims. Over a 5-year period, because our costs went down for actually the claims and the frequency, the number of claims went down, we actually saw lower premiums, which saved another $1 million a year over the course of 5 years. So this is not traditionally security, but you're already an investigator. Look, where can you add value? And I can give you example after example, and the article goes into it. It goes into all the different departments that we explored where there was leakage of profit and loss. And so we went after it. And then those dollars go back to that department. And it makes them very happy, and you're continually building great relationships with those VPs across the year.
Well, I'm just thinking about your relationships with managers. Like after what you were just telling me there, if I was the CEO of Cox and you're coming in, you've gone from the guy with the badge that I got to pay, that I'm reluctant to do, to now I'm excited to have you on my team. You're saving me tons of money. That's great news. And you're talking that language of business. It's like when you show up in France and you're asking around some basic things with some French phrases versus talking in English. People treat you a little bit better, right? Or wherever you go and travel, and you're doing the same thing when you're going into the C-suite. What are the stumbling blocks that prevent other security professionals that you've seen from kind of adopting this mindset shift?
Well, I think a lot of this because they're stuck in their traditional thinking of what security is. That's probably the number one thing. They don't really understand that there's a lot more outside of security. Where I came from, I did less in security and more on the other side, because that's where the opportunities presented itself. And so they have to get their operation comfortable and to where they're very satisfied. And that's when it's time to start looking. The issue is if you stick in that narrow boundary of security, you're never going to add value and you're going to be a cost center. And when that next recession comes, and there's going to be another, you may have to take some hits. You don't want to do that. Conversely, what's interesting, when I was working at that last company, it got to the point where the CFO said, how much, when they were doing their budgets for the following year, how much are you going to recover? I need to put that in a budget. It was an expectation. You're going to recover. That's kind of a nice thing. It was almost like I was generating revenue for the company in the security arena. So again, going back to your question, you have to be able to look outside of it. But if you don't have the background or capability, if you haven't found an MBA mentor, you're going to have to do that. I think one of your questions to me is, what's the very first thing you need to do? Well, if you don't understand business, finance, operations of the company, then find somebody as a mentor and have them help you along the way, because that's going to help you start thinking outside of that box, make that paradigm shift, and then look for those opportunities because they do exist.
That's a great point, because someone with that background can help you translate, learn the language of the C-suite. So maybe after I've let's put myself in the position, you're mentoring me, I'm a director of security at maybe a Fortune 500 company or a mid-sized private firm. After I've kind of got maybe that working man's MBA, where would you suggest that I get started looking around for opportunities to go from that cost center to revenue neutral?
Well, certainly the very first place you always want to look is your own backyard, because you want to use that as an example. And in some companies, security people don't want to look in their own backyard, right? It's you don't want to be casting stones in a glass house, but you need to. You need to be open, transparent. You need to show that I'm cleaning up my own backyard because I got some exorbitant expenses here. So one, look at your budget, look at your contractors, do some RFPs and make some adjustments to show that that is the first thing you want to do. Once you have some successes, and you will find some successes there, then it's time to start looking outside of your department and look around your organization. You should be building relationships, finding yourself involved with pretty much the operations within the organization. If it's manufacturing, certainly you're going to want to be part of the operation. And you have to understand and learn the business and then start looking for loss. Learning to ask the questions within those different departments, like in the telecom industry, it was the construction and fiber department, or it was the customer or field department, or if it was the care department. Start finding ways to be invited or get invited to their meetings, their department meetings, understand their business, and then start asking those questions that you would as an investigator. Ask the questions of like, do you have any loss? Is there any opportunities here to help save the company money? Is there some things that are going on you don't like that maybe we can help you with? In the article, I talk about a plan. A plan, I like acronyms. It's preparation, learning, analysis, then notification. And with anything you do, you want to plan, you get out and figure out what you want to do. We're going to look for opportunities to recover revenue or prevent loss. Then we're going to learn, we're going to analyze it. Then we're going to go back. That's when you do your proposal. Here's what I'd like to do to take this on. And that's part of your SWOT analysis as well. But you have to understand the business to look for those opportunities. But if you don't have the background, like I said previously, make sure you find yourself a mentor who can also provide those introductions to those departments where you can look for opportunities to start recovering losses, reduce costs, what have you. One of the first things we always think about and don't like to talk about is, will technology help us reduce costs so we can reduce guard force? Yeah, we're going to do that. That is short-lived. You're going to hit the bottom sooner or later. Where is the other? There's a lot of opportunities out there because those departments that are manufacturing or fixing things or building things, they have deadlines, commitments. They got to get the product out. They got to get the service to the customer. And they're not really looking so much at loss or damage. Whereas from an outsider point of view, as a security professional, as an investigator, as an open mind person, you're going to be able to sense, see, and offer some opportunities to recover. And you're going to give it right back to them. So that's going to build some great alliances.
I love that mentality too that you have, because I've seen some less forward-thinking organizations that are like, let's just cut the cost down, and you can trim a little bit of fat, but there's diminishing returns. What I love about that mentality that you're talking about is all these other departments in the organization, they're not looking for these opportunities the way that, and you bring in expertise to help them deal with that. And if you multiply all the different departments in your company, there's a lot of opportunities if you have that entrepreneurial mindset. I guess the next question that I want to kind of dive into is what kind of tips and advice do you have for that last part of the plan acronym, notifying management about some of the successes that you've had?
As security professionals, we always generate these great charts and reports to show how much we've prevented, or we like these fancy terms of loss prevention or cost mitigation or loss aversion, some fancy terms. But those are fluffy numbers. Those are things that we use to kind of justify ourselves and our budgets, right? Real dollars brought back to the company do a lot more than those fuzzy numbers.
Money talks.
Money talks. We like to also throw out there the incident rates. Okay, we have an increase in robberies, this, that, or the other. And then we use those types of FBI reports or incident reports to justify asking for more capital. But it goes back to, what are you going to give me in return? Where I came from previously, they wanted a 5-to-1 return. So if they gave me $1 million, you're going to give me $5 million back. Well, how do you do that? As a security professional, how do you do that? Well, you're going to have to reduce losses. You're going to have to also prevent so many accidents. You're going to have to associate dollars with those and show those hard numbers to the chief financial officer that this is how it's going to happen. You can't just go in and ask. Again, if you're looking for those opportunities outside, you're going to do some wonderful things to bring some revenue back. And it goes beyond just that. I'll give you one other example. It was with the marketing department. So the marketing department came to us one time and said, listen, we're trying to understand our customers better when they're in our retail stores. We want to understand how long they're in store, how long they look at a product. If they touch the product, then do they buy the product? We'd like to partner with you on camera systems. Well, let's talk about that. So through a partnership with marketing, we got them to help pay for some of our capital because they were able to use and have access to our floor cameras where they could watch customer behaviors, consumer behaviors. And then it helped them decide how to market and what to market. So we're looking at it from a protection standpoint. They're looking at it from a marketing and sales perspective. How often does that happen in a security arena where you share information? Now, again, this is just the sales floor in the retail stores. We're not giving them access to the safe or anything that would be secure. And believe me, the partnership, and if you don't know about marketing, they have the largest budget in the company. And so anytime marketing comes to me with a project, I'm signing up for that. As long as we're not breaching anything, any type of privacy issues, but we're going to help them generate more sales. And at the same time, they're going to provide us some capital for investment.
And then when you walk into the C-suite and now you have two respected figures in the organization asking for money, it brings for this project, it brings a lot more credibility to what you're asking for than just one person.
Yeah, exactly. So again, it goes outside of just security. It's the partnerships with marketing, with facilities, with risk insurance and safety, with the fiber and construction team, with the field service team. In the telecommunications industry, you're going to build some great liaisons. And all of a sudden, what we found is I had dollars coming to me. They were giving me parts of their budget. So in addition to all the other budget dollars I already had from my own organization.
All right, Alan, let's take this thing home. What's the main takeaway that you want listeners to remember from this episode?
Well, what I want listeners to take away from this is start thinking about security beyond its traditional borders. If you're in a position where you have an opportunity to add value elsewhere, you have to put on your entrepreneurial hat, like you mentioned, because that's really pretty much what I am. I'm a salesman. I'm out there selling what I can do, what services I can provide. If you can't do that, or if you don't have the mentality or skill sets, it's very important to surround yourself with the people that can. Because again, your success is going to be related to your people's success. Bring in the best possible team you can. Fill the gaps and the voids where you lack that talent or experience, exposure, or expertise, and start looking for opportunities to add value. There are plenty of them out there.
Oh, great insights, Alan. Article, can't wait for it to come out. I will include a link once it's up, and looking forward to getting the chance to read that. And Alan, why don't you tell listeners what you're working on now and how they can get in touch?
Of course, now I'm in the university setting. I just finished up my first year at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University, teaching in the College of Business, Security, and Intelligence. This summer, I'm actually going through I2 training, which is an intelligence platform. And certainly, I'm getting retrained on that. I went through that 12 years ago, and there's been several upgrades. Getting trained on that because we're going to start instituting that in our classes. So our students are going to come out with the ability to use I2. It's a very marketable skill. I'm working on curriculum for new classes here at the university, really focused on giving back. I see great opportunities for this next generation. I'm excited to see them get into our career path in the corporate security arena. And nothing thrills me more now than giving back and developing these students for the future. And as far as getting a hold of me, LinkedIn's the best way. Get me on LinkedIn. You can also get me at Saquella, my last name, at erau.edu here at the university.
All right, Alan, thanks again for being on the show.
Thank you, Robert.
Again, that was Alan Saquella, Professor of Business Security and Intelligence at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University, and he's also a consultant for Verensics. Thanks again for listening to Talking Threat Intelligence. Never miss an episode by subscribing to the show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever else you get your episodes. And if you'd like more tips on building a successful threat intelligence program, be sure to check out our resource page at liferafinc.com/blog. That's liferafinc.com/blog. And I hope you tune in next time.